Alright, here's a quick demo of Registax. I'm using a I shouldn't say Power Mac, I'm using an ASUS i7 processor, and I'm launching Registax here for my desktop. This is kind of a messy desktop, so you don't normally want to do things this way, set up your desktop this way, but so what I'm going to do is actually before I launch that desktop, I'm going to show a sample, quick sample. I don't claim to be an expert in Registax at all. I've read a little bit different people who don't claim to be experts in how they try to process photos and or video files into photos. I'm going to look at my picture library, my Backyard EOS, and all I have right now are Mars and Jupiter, which the Jupiters are not very good video files, but I'm going to just play out a Mars file, for example. I'm actually going to play. See which one I'm going to play. I'm going to play, let's say, third or fourth from the end here. Actually, when I highlight, you can see these different captures I got the other night. Some are brighter, some aren't. The brighter ones tend to work better. You're better off getting a little bit brighter when you're using Backyard EOS. Not too dim. The dim ones are kind of difficult to deal with. This is a little bit dimmer. But I'm going to go back, say, 4 from the last one. I'm going to just open this up and play this real quick so you can see what it looks like. I can open it with Windows. Oh, sorry. I want to actually open up the. I'll go back 3. Okay, so I'll go back 3. I'm going to open up. Hang on a minute. Taking a second here. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to open up the third. Yeah. All right. I'm going to open up this one. So I'm going to open up the actual video file here. So we'll see what it looks like. You can see that we don't have the best image here, but you know, it's moving around 1 or 2 arc seconds. This is 15 arc seconds across, so you can see it's moving about a 15th to maybe 1 to 2/15ths. So you can see the amount of seeing. There's a lot of variation here in this image. So this is our one of our images of Mars. All right, so now we're going to open this up. I'm going to launch Registax. I've already launched it, and we're going to go for this this file here. And I'm going to just expand this out real quick to make sure I hit. Oh, it's 1:07 a.m. Okay, 1:07 a.m. All right, so we're going to go for that. So you can see this is one I was working on earlier, but I'm going to select a new one. Now what I found with this ASUS PC, my other PC, my Windows 7 machine didn't give me this issue, but with the ASUS PC, I found that I lose some of my menu items here. This is the one I want right here. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'll take. Well, I'm going to get one of these. We can play it back later. I'm not getting full details here. I'm just going to go for the brighter one right here. It's third back, so I'm going to open this up. What I wanted to bring up real quick was down here where it says limit setup. You can see it has there's a couple settings here when you're doing a limit for align points. First, you choose your select to open up your folder, and then this align tab, you want to open this up and you want to have it select align points. You can actually scroll and select different frames in the movie down here. But the funny thing about this is, although this is a big screen in a Windows 8 machine, I lose part of this menu down here. It's not set up right with the fonts or whatever. The setup default doesn't work well on this like it does on my Windows 7. Now when I minimize this a little bit or make this smaller, I can see these other options down here. A lot of times this is what's selected, which is the quality, and it's usually set to default at 90%, which will give you the top 90% quality frames. And if all your frames are pretty poor quality, it may select all the frames out of, you don't want all the frames, you want 10% of the frames roughly when you're doing planetary, unless you have a lot of excellent frames. So in this case, what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to worry about this quality settings down here for limiting. I'm going to hit set align points. It's going to automatically select them. It usually works pretty well. You want to delete the ones if they're near the edge sometimes, but having more than one on a big object is a good thing to do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say align. It'll do the alignment. So the first step is set align points, and when we hit align, it's going to go through and align everything. And as you can see, the processor is going to be working for a minute here. You can see the amount of time it takes. I found that my Windows 7 box with Registax 6 versus the Windows 8 with i7 quad core. Here I am using 8 CPUs, as you can see up here in the top corner here. The quad core isn't that much, this i7 isn't that much faster than my dual core, really. I mean, it probably is, but you're still waiting. You don't notice that much of a difference. When you're waiting, you're waiting. It can stack pretty quickly if I have it plugged in with this ASUS, this ROG machine, but it can do things pretty quickly, especially changing the wavelets, which is pretty memory intensive. So here's my result. It's kind of mushy. So now I want to actually limit it. You can see it's gonna automatically select 397 frames out of 400, which is quite a few frames. I want really more quality than that. Now I can either change the quality here. I can actually type in a number and it'll tell me how many frames. It'll choose 142 out of 400. I really want 40 out of 400. Now I can say 98% here. Now it's giving me 49. That's close, but I want like 40 out of 400. That's pretty good. That's 10%, so that's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this box up here, bring the rest of this menu. I'm still missing some stuff here at the bottom. Kind of shows up. A little bit of a hassle here. Maybe I can move the box this way. There may be some setting, I don't know, with Windows that I need to do to allow this to be viewed. Well, basically what I want is I want the best frames, and I already have this pre-selected at 40. I want the best 40 frames, so only choose 40. I'm going to go in here and hit enter just to make sure it selects that. And what I do is I type limit, hit the limit, and it will limit it, and it gives me a drawing of the movements of the relative points during the AVI file, the different extreme areas where it went. And I also have correct geometry by default, which you want to leave that on. Some people for planetary, they do center of the planet and they don't do the correct geometry and all that. But if you have seeing this affecting this whole rippling, you're going to want to correct that. I would think. That's my guess, anyways. So now we're ready for stacking. We're going to stack these 40 files, these 40 images, and it's already done it. I go to full screen here. You can see it's already done it. So now there's the results of my 40 out of 400. So now I go to Wavelet, and there's all these options over here, different things you can do. Now what I normally do, there's a lot of other ways of processing images, but what I normally do is I use a default wavelet. Sometimes I use Gaussian. There's a lot of things to tweak. You just kind of experiment around. What I found is probably a good thing to do to get an idea what the heck something's doing. One of these wavelet filters especially is you can just hit this here and you'll see the results of what it's going to do by just putting your mouse here, and you can see a preview of what that setting is going to do when the wavelet is performed. So you want to, every time you make a change on any of these wavelets, all the wavelets are calculated. So you basically, once you get a rough idea of what works pretty well for you for your type of planetary images that are somewhat similar, you're going to want to save them down here on this bottom corner here, save them and then load them. So you'll have a starting point to start with, something that seems to work, and you can have a bunch of different named wavelet schemes. You basically are only saving the wavelet scheme. It's not saving the gamma panel or any of the other things. It's only saving the wavelet scheme. So the other things, you may want to do a screenshot to find out if something else you've tweaked to help out. I usually do about 3 or 4 things to get my images where they're at. There's a lot of fine tuning that can be done, a lot of playing around. There's probably a theory behind this. You probably need a standard image or something to find out what's going on. What I found is Gaussian affects the edges differently, kind of tapers the edges and kind of blurs the edges a bit. The Gaussian filter is actually making things not as sharp. The default wavelet filter will make things sharper. I like sharper things, so I avoid Gaussian unless at times. Now there's settings inside the Gaussian filter here, wavelet, that will do things like get rid of noise and add detail also. But so we're going to start with the default filter. We're going to use all the layers. I'm going to start moving these sliders over and we'll see what happens here. Oh, let me close this. Oh, what's happening is I'm hitting the wrong mouse button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this over and we're going to see some changes here. And you can see the green is going to actually be enhanced and the red is going to be believe. I gotta find out. I'm gonna go to extreme. I'll show you an extreme example. All right, here's an extreme example. You can see this is quite a bit. And you can see some things are made brighter and some things are dimmer. So you can move something to the extreme, see what happens, and then back it off. What you'll see is fracturing, and you'll see fine amount of fracturing and stuff. And the first filter, the top filter, gives you the finest detail of changes. You can see this when I click this. There's the finest amount of grain on the screen over here. Whereas the other filters are doing big changes. Like I'll show you this one here. See, this is big grain wavelet changes. So you start, most of your details actually going to come from the first wavelet filter, and the others are going to add generalized stuff. So that's what I found is wavelet 1. And what some people do is they make very few changes, and they actually use the Gaussian for planetary, and they do a link. And when you link them, they amplify each other, which is pretty interesting. It's a pretty quick way of doing it. I don't normally do that. There's also a thing of, I believe, for the lunars, you start with a heavier amount and then go to lesser. So you have these set higher, and then you taper down. I meant to get some moon images to show that later. Now in this Gaussian, I'm just going to show you this Gaussian. Actually, it looks like it defaulted to my last Gaussian setting. You can see I have some sharpening things here where it's actually sharpening the image, and I have some denoise things. Denoise will make it blurrier, but also will get rid of noise grain, and sharpening will make things sharper, the details that are out there that are sharper. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just set a few of these things up a bit. I'm gonna go a little extreme here, and then we're gonna back off. Another thing I found is there's also, this isn't the default setting. Now you can see I've gone way beyond, you know, by multiplying all these effects, I've gone way beyond. Also, I'm using link. I'm gonna turn off the link. Now they'll work, but they won't link up. And here you can see for Gaussian, we're gonna move into Gaussian first, because a lot of people use Gaussian. They like Gaussian. There's this thing, initial layer. This is the wavelet layer that it starts with. I'm not sure how this, I know it'll work with a lower layer, but if you start with layer 1, which is by default, you'll find a lot of change. But actually what's happening is it's softening everything here. See how it's softening things? Now it's actually softening the image. So what I've actually found, there's a couple things you can do. One thing is you can turn off these layers and only use a couple to start with. You don't have to use all the wavelets. That's one thing you can do. And another thing you can do is you can actually step up and start at a different layer, which I found is interesting. As you can see, I'm starting with layer 3 now. What's interesting is I don't even have it supposedly executing, but it's starting with layer 3 and doing its effect. Let me go back. Let me go to layer 3 and actually make some changes. You can see we're making some changes here. And you can see what happens with Gaussian, the Gaussian filter. We get this kind of a pan effect. We get like a lightning around the edges. There's actually more of a blurring around the edges, so it has more of a globe-like view of the planet. You'll see where there's a lighting effect, and what happens is you actually get a lighter area. And if you want that lighter area, it's good. But if you do it too much, what you'll get is almost like a mirror pattern. What looks like a test mirror pattern. You'll get these shadows where there's like a lot of shadow around the edges, and it almost looks like it's a test pattern for a telescope mirror or something, instead of a planetary detail that you want. The planets look pretty flat actually in the eyepiece, and some of these lighting effects, some of these blur effects and stuff actually give them a rounder spherical look than what you would see in the eyepiece. At least with me, when I look, they seem to be like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play with these first 3 filters. Now what happens is there's other things like sharpening. You can see here I can start to sharpen more and more. It'll get to a point where you'll start seeing rips and tears. It'll start looking like a Christmas ornament, and there'll be thin lines. Let me hit this for a second here. Can't see them happening right now. There's also a step increment. So these are a few things you can just kind of toy with. And then what happens is when you're done and you've got something that you like that will work pretty well, you can come down here and you can save it. I'm going to save this real quick. I'll just call this test and delete Mars for video. So there it is. So this is the one I just created, and I could reload it at any time now, and it'll show this starting point here, which is not very good actually. Now I'm going to start with 4. It's going to be a little softer. I'm trying to get edge details here. I can also zoom in a little bit. I can show a processing area. I can zoom in a bit. I don't remember where the zoom feature is, but we're not going to worry about that right now. It's pretty big already. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some, you notice I have some sharpening. I usually sharpen a little bit with the Gaussian, and sometimes I add some noise, denoising. You want to just kind of, you can tweak, you can either type it in or use the arrows. Now the thing is, if you're not on a fast processor, every time you use an arrow, it's going to recalculate everything over again. This thing is calculating wavelets quickly compared to my 7. You might want to type it in if you're making a big amount of change instead of using the arrows. You see, I typed that in, hit a lot of denoise. So this is actually blurrier now than it was because of that. Now I can go back. I'll go back to say 40. So this is what happens. You're just making subtle adjustments. So that's the one thing is the wavelets. You're making these adjustments on these different wavelets. You see now I'm only using 3 wavelets right now, which can still give me some pretty good results. Now the second thing that I do after wavelets for what I'm doing anyways, and I'm not saying this is the best way, but I use gamma correction. There's 2 things that I use that are pretty easy to do that you can do. There's actually 3 or 4 things I've done before, and I'm sure there's more experts that have better techniques than I do, so feel free to check it out and experiment. One thing is this gamma will actually is like a curve. I can brighten and darken areas of the image and change the effects of how things work by moving these things around. Basically, I'm using a left mouse to move these. I can add another point with a right click on the mouse pad. You can see a little bit of movement can make a big effect. So I do some positive and negative curves, trying to bring out the details I want. I start looking for subtle things, little details, what looks to be good. I'll try to remember what it looked like, the planet looked like, and try to bring out some good details. I know that there's the ice cap on Mars was out there. This is a little light. I didn't really see that. It's going to show up as light. I could say it's a storm, but I don't know if there was really a storm on there or not. It might be more of my artifacts. This is a little dark too. Now, the interesting thing too, gamma, this is gamma, and you can always reset it. But you can come down here, and this will affect, on my Windows 7 box, this didn't seem to work, and both of these didn't seem to work at the same time. It seemed like one overrode the other, but on my Windows 8 box, these seem to work together, which is a good thing. I can actually bring up the contrast and the brightness a bit. The contrast sometimes brings out details also. And all these affect each other. So you tweak a little bit in one spot, tweak a little bit in another spot. And there's probably a method of doing this, but right now I'm not going to delve into that. I'm more into experimenting. Now I can recall when I was looking that there was a blackness around there was some dark area down here. So I basically tweak away. I don't necessarily look at a map of Mars to try to make this match a map, and then I'll see what my results are, and then maybe when I look at a map of Mars with my first results, I might make some adjustments and try to get a better image and figure out how to do better. So that's the first thing. Now, so watch what happens. I can turn off a wavelet. Sometimes I get better results, sometimes I don't get as good result. I'll add a wavelet here. And these wavelets, even when they're set to 1 at default, this one isn't, they will give results. You can see what this is basically doing. These are lightening up some of these areas, making this quite a bit lighter, lightening up this area a bit. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this initial layer to 4, which is kind of unusual. It's actually, coming down here. And now you'd think that initial layer 4 would skip these other layers, these other changes, but check this out. They don't. They're still affected. It's just when do you start? Which layer do you start with? And I found that at least for Mars, I found initial layer 4 works really well. And then there's these step increments, which is another type of thing, which I'm really not even sure what this represents, but sometimes upping these helps too. So you just kind of tweak around, and it's really there's a lot of trial by error. There's probably a method to the madness. You can see what this is doing here with this Gaussian actually is it's getting darker in here and in the center, and it's leaving the edge brighter. Really not what I want. It's making it look more concave or something. Not really what I want, so I'm going to get rid of those increments right now. All right, now, rather than, okay, the other thing I can show you real quick, and you can make changes when you output this TIFF. I'm showing more brightness, more details. You can make changes with the TIFF image in Photoshop or something later, another program. I'm also going to show you color mixing. Is it RGB aligner color mixing? No, it's, no, that's not it. RGB balance, I don't look at that. I've played with that. I played with histograms and stuff. Histograms, I played with that too. You can do the histogram thing. Usually I don't toy with it. I'd rather toy with it in another program. Color mixing, I toyed with at times to get a little bit of a different balance to add more of a channel, one of the channels of color. So I've done that. I've changed huge or added saturation sometimes with Jupiter to get some more, almost make it seem more earth tone. I might add saturation a bit. Hang on 1 minute. Turn off this phone. So now I'm going to so I made a minor adjustment here. You know, not that it matters that much, but I made a quick minor adjustment here. So here's an image. Now when I want to save it, I want to hit the do all. Let's say I want to save this as a test. I hit do all. It does the whole process. Then I save the image. I'm going to save it as a TIFF. I'll just say a test TIFF image, and I'm done. I save it as a TIFF usually, not a JPEG, and then I convert it later in another program. That way I have a high resolution to toy with. So now I've just saved this. Now I can actually go out. When I'm done also, I can save the scheme, but it doesn't save this part. So these, you usually want to take a screenshot if you want to keep these other settings in mind for future reference, or you get a rough idea what to do later on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just change from Gaussian to default. See the difference in changes. Notice default is a little grainier, but it's actually showing me more detail. So you can tweak default back a bit. Now Gaussian, I can get more detail. I can go in and do sharpening on individual layers and get some sharpening and stuff and get detail that way. You know, it has a softer edge and stuff, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to default. Default, notice the difference that default doesn't have all these options for Gaussian, these other little options down here of denoise and sharpening. So the default filter is just a straight filter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off some of these other filters. Actually, sometimes I've had just one filter sometimes. I've used one filter, brought up some details, and then, sorry about that, that's another program. And then try to get rid of some of this extra noise or whatever, or change the noise a bit with the curves, you know, maybe curves and color. So you can see here's the three things I'm just dealing with to get a change. Of course, if you overdo it, you can overdo it to see where it's going and come back. Like I don't want the sky too bright. I don't want this too bright necessarily. And sometimes I use a little bit of a negative curve, but you can see it's almost making the space go away. Not very bright. So I can go back to normal, start up again. So there you have it. There's another basic image. I can also change my initial layer on this and see how that affects it. Go back to 1. You know, I can add another wavelet if I want. I can see what the wavelets are doing, each one. See, it's a finer thing. And then save it. Now, let's say I just want to go out and I want to load one of my earlier ones. Actually, I loaded like a Saturn or an earlier Jupiter test or something and modified it. But I'm going to load Mars 6. Let's see how this Mars 6 test, hopefully, and it might have been in the same file. I'm going to load that one and see what that setting was. I just go out, I get the file, and it brings in all these settings. So here's the settings for the wavelet for that I used in an earlier test here, and I can come in and modify this a bit and try to get kind of the same results. And I can try it with a different, somewhat similar setting. So there you go. So there's Mars. You know, and I can use basically these. It'll use these same settings. Interesting. My initial layer is not 4 here. It's 3. I don't know if I saved it as 3 or not. I could load another one to find out, but interesting, very interesting. So that's a little bit about, I can change the step increments, kind of go crazy here. Look at that. It's obviously a greater increment is a coarser results, which is not what I want. I want more detail. So I usually use a 0 increment. So that's my quick take on Registax. And when you're done, you use other programs to do more tweaking with it if you want to do it outside of Registax. But usually Registax will get you pretty close to where you want to go. There's some things like denoising. Here's something I don't use much. I play with it, but it never seems to do much what I want. You know, I like to use a different noise filter somewhere else. De-ringing, denoising. You know, noise reduction. I don't like the internal noise reduction of this stuff, so I just go to reset, turn it off. I don't want those features. So that's it. That's the quick stuff.